everybody. Sorry that I'm late. Oh, crap. I don't think I have my microphone plugged. Weird. Of course I don't. Let's see if this works. It probably won't. I don't know if it'll automatically switch to that or not. Sorry about that. It seems to be pretty low. I don't know how things work. Can you guys hear me? Okay, well, as long as it sounds like something, I normally use an external microphone that I can put closer to me because I do talk so quietly. And I can see that these little green circles that kind of gauge the amount of audio coming in so that you hear. It's very low. It's hovering at 1 or 2 out of 6. So I'm a very quiet talker. So if you guys don't hear me at some point, please let me know, and hopefully I'll catch it while in the chat. How has your week been, by the way? I hope you've been fine. I've been having kind of a rough week as far as my health is concerned. You know, it's been, what, 5-6 months since I had COVID, and I am still feeling the effects of it. I have no idea why. I've read some articles and things like that, kind of explaining why some people are trying to figure out why some people have long-term issues, it seems like, and I'm falling into that category. I'm still coughing, so if I happen to cough, I do apologize. In the meantime, and hopefully you guys have been able to avoid any illnesses thus far. Speaking of. Okay, so let's start. So I always start when I was younger. I don't know exactly how old I was, but me and my sister had a best friend. We both shared a best friend because we were all the same age. And she was my best friend for years and years and years and years. Anyways, at some point, she went to visit her uncle in Mississippi. And her uncle ended up seeing an image of me and my sister with the friend, with our friend, which is fine. I mean, you have pictures, right? That makes sense. And the uncle turns to my friend and asks, you know, why are you hanging around with those N-words? And I don't remember what my friend's response was to him, but I think she thought it was a positive response, positive enough to tell both me and my sister about the situation. After which, or I guess during the explanation, she ended up going, you know, but it's okay. I consider you guys white, as if that's some sort of compliment. And for some people, I'm sure it is. You know, they kind of mimic different races and hoping to kind of pass as that particular race. And so typically these people, I mean, as far as Western society goes, kind of that colonial society is concerned, people want to be as close to whiteness as possible, since that's kind of the race that has determined that they are better than everybody else. I'm just kidding. But they did determine that hundreds of years ago. But there are some people who, you know, want to be actually as close to a minority race, such as Blackness, Native American, something along those lines. And while they're not very common, I'm not sure if you guys have been following any sort of news that's kind of apolitical in nature, although this does breach politics too, somehow. But there was a woman who was recently, uh, you know, she wrote a Medium article about how she had mimicked or tried to be Black her entire adult life thus far. And so she basically outed herself. Now, as to why she did that, I think there's been some conflicting information, whether she has tried to basically do it because she just felt compelled to do so. I think in the Medium article, which I did read, she was just explaining, like, I can no longer be a coward about this and things along those lines. There's also reports saying that she was going to be outed in this way, and so she preemptively outed herself. I don't know what the truth is there, and it's not for me to determine, and I honestly don't really care. I'm sure some people do, but I don't care as to why she ended up outing herself. But she wasn't Black; she was a white woman. And so there's been, as of recently, a series of white people who have done this, who have attempted to be Black or some other racial minority while they were in the dominant racial minority. So you have, I have a list here, Martina Big, who was white, who pretended to be Black, Judah, who is, I guess that's her new name. She's a white woman who pretended to be Filipino. Martina Seltzer, which she's a white woman who said she was biracial with white and Native American. Jessica Krug, with whom I just talked to you about, a white woman who pretended to be Afro-Puerto Rican. And then I think everybody's familiar with Rachel Dolezal, who is a white woman who continues to live as a Black woman, and despite being outed. So, first of all, I got the idea as far as to do this stream because I think that people are asking this question, but kind of it's, as far as politically concerned or culturally concerned, it's not a question that people are comfortable asking, which is, why are they doing it? What is the reason behind it? And I think all of them kind of have deferred to, well, this is the identity that I feel is my own. And so is there such a thing as transracial identity, which is somebody who, I guess, there's different definitions as transracial is concerned. Typically, it involves with adoption. So minority children who are adopted into a dominant minority household. That's usually been for a while what transracial means. And it's kind of that familial situation and how well they handle it and how well they see, and actually how well society handles it around them. So some sociologists have currently started adopting transracial to indicate the situation that we have here that I explained, with people whom are one race who live and identify as another race. So there's a lot of people that don't even like that analogy to be made. They believe that, this is a completely for attention. Maybe it's designed to actually insult the minority race, since a lot of them are reported as, I don't know any of these people, but a lot of them have been reported as being kind of more stereotyped in nature. I'm not sure how true that is. I think that we'll all defer to kind of stereotypes once we see it and once we know about a background. But as far as all indications concerned, this particular woman, while she wasn't living kind of a stereotyped life, she did actually a lot of she was a college professor whom has stepped down as of like last week or something. She was a college professor who studied African American lives and who actually studied in Africa and studied that culture and things like that. She actually had a very well received book that she wrote on the subject matter of these things, of whatever her primary subject is as a college professor, that is well known within the community of African American studies and even sociology. And so we have to kind of I feel like we're obligated with these very recent cases coming forward. We're kind of obligated to ask the question as far as if the identity that they say that they are, if they believe it, if they truly, think of themselves as Black or Latin American or Native American, something like that, or Filipino in one case. One of the things that I did notice that I'm sure all of us have noticed here is what these women have in common, or what these people have in common. And one is that they are all women. As far as I know, I'm sure there are men who have done this, but I think the more notable cases, the recent cases, have all been women, and they've all been white women. And usually you think of, any type of racial minority attempting to pass as a white person in order to obtain that, I guess, what they believe to be a privileged status, and it is. So I think it's kind of interesting that we have kind of the flip-flop of that, and women white women trying to be racial minorities or trying to pass as racial minorities. Now, the thing about these people is that they've done more than passing. Passing means that you're on that edge where somebody might go, hey, what's your race? Or something like that. I can't tell. So that's kind of a with intention to be another race, right? But these people have not only passed, but have succeeded in fooling the people around them. And so they essentially went beyond passing. And I'm sure that people will disagree with me on this one, since passing, as far as race is concerned, is a big deal. And it's kind of implicated here as well. But I think that if you are able to fool somebody, you have successfully passed and more, right? It's not just that you're no longer kind of going, I wonder what they are. You believe what they say, and because they're able to, they've adopted the identity so well. I know that some people I've seen on Twitter and things like that have asked, what is the difference between transgender and gender as a whole, and then somebody doing this with their race, like racial dysphoria. I don't know, there's no exact term for this, because it's a relatively recent phenomenon as far as who is doing this, who has adopted doing this. And when it kind of feeds into the majority, people start kind of looking into it a little bit more. It's always explained when a minority is able to do it, or it tries to do it, right? There's always kind of the underlying assumption that, of course, you want to be as close to whiteness as possible, because there's some privileges that go along with that. But when somebody does it in reverse, people start asking these questions. I know that some people with transgender, as far as transgender is concerned, will say it can be a brain mechanism involved where my brain mimics, this identity more so than the identity I was born with, or that I was expected to exhibit based off of biological characteristics. But it should be sufficient enough for me to say, if I am this, if this is my identity, then that's who I am. And they they shouldn't have a reason beyond that. If you feel it, you are it, right? And so can we apply that mentality to these women who have mimicked, more than mimicked, who have been able to trick others in believing that they are the race that they say they are when they are not. And I want to know why this phenomenon is coming into focus now. Like, what is going on in society? And so I've got there's not really good explanation here. So if you're here for answers as far as, black and white answers, I will not have that for you. I'm kind of more hypothesizing and things like that, and going off of some of what I've read on the subject. There are some, now we breach into feminist theory a little bit here. And so this is a very complicated topic. So a lot of feminist theory says that gender and race and age and class are inseparable. And so they kind of use these things, they're analogous to one another, because you cannot separate X from Y. They are, they encapsulate the identity, period. But what about when we start asking, well, transgender seems to have some sort of biological basis involved. We have more acceptance of transgender, but there's like a serious pushback, serious kind of guttural reaction against trans race, which I know is not an official term right now. Why is that there? And what do they really reliably overlap with each other? Or should feminist theory actually separate it out, realize that this is the entire identity of a human being in our society, but they do represent different things. And I think that we can successfully do that without downplaying one or the other. So for instance, with transgender, I mentioned that there is some sort of biological basis. In fact, you can see that we have a clear biological basis for male and female, right? And so somebody that I read mentioned that, this, as far as the difference between men and women, is biologically meaningful, but culturally, no, I don't remember what he said. Sorry, I should have written it down. It was something to the effect of it is based in biology as far as those differences, but the culture determines how those differences act. And here with race, as far as scientists know, as far as all the people in sociology and psychology and anthropology can ascertain here, is that race is not biologically meaningful. So you can look at somebody's genetic makeup, determine if they're going to be male or female, or if they were male or female, but you cannot determine their race based off of that, because there is no biological indicator based on race. It's all a culturally prescribed category. So there we have a huge difference between transgender and race, right? We have a purely cultural one that can flip whenever it wants. It's more flexible than the biologically based, the biological body looking like male or female, and then that identity being adopted to that image, right? So Erin is right here. The whole thing here is I'm just kind of asking questions. I'm wondering about this. Can we do this? Wookie fanboy says ethnicity is the difference. Identity based on ethnicity is probably more valid than based on nothing or an assumed identity. So this is a good distinction to make. It's more than ethnicity in and of itself, right? So it's more about ancestry too. So ancestry, as far as, you know, what your ancestral group has always or has been a part of, how society has received that particular group based off of some sort of racial category. And so we have a huge distinction here between, again, transgender and race. Ancestry. There is no ancestry or familial lineage involved with gender. There's just not. There's nothing you can look back to as far as like, yes, and because because they were male or female, you know, they, you know, had to inhabit, well, they did have to inhabit certain roles, but it doesn't matter. It didn't prescribe the actions of the family, right? It just was, well, they just adopted roles based off of their biological look as male or female. As far as race is concerned, culture adopted those roles for them. And it's a little bit, it's very much different. So ethnicity is historical and meaningful history behind your family lineage. And that lineage does include race. It doesn't necessarily include gender. Lindsay says that, hi, yes, our culture molds us. We can't escape that. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, essentially, you are your culture. In fact, because what I know as far as the brain is concerned, your culture has a lot of influence on how your brain reacts to things. And it's fascinating because that's how malleable your brains are too. And so that's a special thing about the brain, is that we are malleable, particularly when we are developing as children, because as I've mentioned time and time again, your brain is not fully developed until the age of 25. And so that means there is a lot of opportunity there for your brain to be influenced based on your surroundings, and nothing can do that better, shall I say, than the culture in which you live. Excuse me again. So that begs the question here. Should society be a little bit more forgiving for those who adopt different races, as opposed to the race that they actually are? If they say, hey, I feel this way, and this is how I've lived all of my adult life, you know, is that true? Is that a valid thing that we should all accept? Now, we obviously don't have to all accept anything, but I think that the boundaries of race are already breaking down. You're seeing a lot of more multiracial families. You're seeing more biracial, multiracial people in the world. When I was growing up, I'm biracial, as many of you know. I was an anomaly. I would go to the store with my mom, and people's jaws would be hitting the ground, seeing both me and my sister with our white mom. So we stood out. It was kind of difficult in that regard, and so I'm enjoying seeing more people that are biracial or multiracial, because that reaction is no longer happening, and it's more becoming the norm. So we're already starting to see a breakdown in that racial category. And if that's the case, should we then push not towards necessarily accepting the identity in which someone says they are as far as race is concerned, even though they may not be that race, but should we say, well, our culture should be accepting of all races, therefore people wouldn't feel the necessity to mimic another race? And I think that there's an argument there to be made for sure. Yes, absolutely, we want our society to be accepting of all races and treat everybody equally. But within a historical context, that has not been the case as far as, I hate using the Western society is concerned, but that's true. And I understand race as a category too being a relatively new phenomenon. So it's not something that is a staple. So I think I keep mentioning this in some of the streams that focus on race is, excuse me, is, whether ancient Rome, right? So they did have slaves. They had people also that were not originally born in Rome. And what they determined, it wasn't a race thing. It was, you are Roman or you are not Roman. And you can become Roman doing certain things. And so they did not necessarily adopt a race category. It was based off of where you literally were born. And if you weren't born in that area, what actions you took in order to become Roman, which is an interesting concept too. So in that regard, race is a relatively new construct, right? It's been particularly meaningful in order for the purpose of subjugating certain people. And so it became a real big deal during, the Atlantic slave trade. That's when, these hard and, black and white categories came into existence more so than anything. And they kind of stuck around. So I'm enjoying seeing that break down. But at the same time, do you think that because people are becoming more multiracial, biracial, and things like that, do you think that this is the reason behind these particular women adopting these particular races? It's kind of like, well, they do it because it's starting to, the race isn't starting, the racial lines are actually starting to become more fuzzy. And so maybe at some point that adoption of that identity will be accepted in society. I know that that's probably not what they're actively thinking, right? But it could be a reasoning for the phenomenon taking place in the frequency that it is. One thing to note too is, as even a biracial person myself, as somebody who is within a minority category, it is a lot more difficult for them to adopt a different race, specifically if they try to be, if they say that they're white or Caucasian at this point, because they don't look it. Now there are lightening creams on the market that can help lighten skin. There are products on the market that can help try to get curly hair straight. If you want to burn off your hair, you can absolutely do that. So there are these things on the market today that do try to get darker people closer to whiteness. But there's not really anything on the market that does the reverse, not any widespread thing. I guess there's tanning, right? But I think people don't necessarily associate, hey, I'm getting a tan in order to mimic or in order to look black, or brown. I'm getting a tan because I believe it makes me look healthy and all those things. That I don't know why you would do that to your skin, but yeah, I'm not white, so there are some people that feel obligated to do that. I know my stepmom is one of those people, or at least was one of those people, who did the tanning thing all the time. And every time she did it, I was just like, she is ruining her skin. Erin A. mentioned that it's interesting from just a cultural relativism perspective to wonder why this is happening. Yeah, I actually don't see this phenomenon occurring in different countries necessarily. Now, we do have, again, the lightening creams on the market that do try to get people closer to whiteness. This is a big deal in East Asian countries, particularly. they'd have surgery in order to get the double fold in the eyelid in order to mimic more whiteness, because that is kind of the standard beauty at this time. But again, is it because our culture is also so multiracial? We don't see, anybody necessarily abroad trying to get closer to blackness, or whatever, or Indian, or anything along those lines. I mean, Indian, by the way, or Native American for that matter. Not necessarily happening abroad. I don't think Native Americans actually lived abroad, so that they wouldn't necessarily even think about it. But other societies, other countries tend to be a lot more homogeneous than American society, right? So speaking of the tanning thing, Sean Close says, what I've heard is that tanning became popular because rich people and celebrities would often vacation in nice sunny places getting tan. So it developed out of another type of identity. Well, it was a status symbol. So I think, again, your class is a part of your identity too. And so, yeah, this could be an adoption of an identity of one that kind of mimics, hey, I have money, I'm wealthy, I have more power than others who are unable to do this. It's definitely a status symbol, or a kind of, dare I say, privileged symbol, if you will, or a symbol, an action symbolizing privilege. Does that make sense? I think that makes better sense. So yeah, we have all these wealth or status symbols throughout history. This is a very common thing that people did, especially when they have hierarchies in society, because nobody wants to be on the bottom of that hierarchy. It's hard, it's a struggle, and you are literally looked down upon if you are in a certain place in that hierarchy. And you are favored if you are in the higher echelons of that society. I personally advocate for egalitarianism, but not everybody does. I don't really have an answer as to why this is happening. I don't know why they've done this. I think that if they truly believe that that is their identity, it certainly is their identity if they've lived that most of their life as who they say who they identify as. So in the case of this professor who recently did this, she started doing this when she was a teenager. And she's well into adulthood at this point. So she's lived longer as a supposed Black woman than she had a white woman. And that's odd. And so I think do we accept that? Do we take her at her word and say, yeah, that's your identity because you feel it and you say it? I do believe that she absolutely feels that way. Now it's up to us to determine how we react to that, whether we react negative or positively. I think that, I find it hard that somebody would be doing it for nefarious purposes if they've lived that way for 20, 30, 40 years, right? It just doesn't make sense. You would do it, if you were being nefarious about it, you would do it for a very limited time and then, out yourself and basically say, see, they don't have this problem because I lived like that for, a year or something along those lines. They do it to prove a point, not to identify as it. I don't know, what do you guys think? I don't know if you've heard about this case, so if you haven't, by all means, read about it. I'll try to link some things in the description box after this, after I finish. But I'm curious to get your perspectives on this, because there's nothing really in the literature about this beyond kind of, being a very relatively recent phenomenon, right? And so I'm curious to see where you guys are in this. Do you believe that these people, who are all women, who all have the privilege of being better able to pass as minorities because they're Caucasian and they're white, and so they can darken their skin a lot more easily again than I could possibly lighten it. They could curl their hair a lot more easily than I could straighten mine. And so there's a certain level of privilege in that, oddly enough. So, do you think that, this actually is a nefarious act, the intentional nefarious act? Or do you think that there will be unintentional, nefarious? Why do I keep using that word? Like, do you think that there will be unintentional consequences that are negative in nature, that come out of these, self-prescribed identities? Do you think we should have the luxury or be capable and able of identifying as whoever, whatever we say we are? And Renee says, what if it was like a lie that got bigger and bigger and just went crazy into a huge thing that ended up absolutely out of control? Yeah, what if we have to entertain that possibility? Absolutely. I mean, it could. I can see that being a possibility. Now, can I see it being a possibility for someone like this professor who actually seemed to have respect for the identity that she inhabited, because of her background and what she studied and things like that? I mean, she knew the ins and outs of so much of this, and so much of that identity that she adopted. And she wrote about it, and she wrote about the struggles of inhabiting this particular identity for the people involved. I don't think she didn't do not like an autobiography or anything like that. It was just, she did kind of more of a ethnography, if you will, on these different cultures, even going to Africa and studying their particular cultures. So it could be a lie that's spun out of control, but it's a very long-lasting lie too. And I don't know. I feel like even lies break down sooner than this. I think there's the case of what's her name, Rachel Dolezal, Rachel Dolezal, who was outed, but she continues to live this way. She continues to say that she identifies as a Black woman, and she continues to live like that, despite being outed. So in her case especially, I don't think it's a lie that got bigger and bigger and bigger. I think it's a very real phenomena to her, at any rate, to the point where she's willing to continue to live in that fashion because she identifies with it. Majuki says it could almost be construed as fraud when applying to college. Yeah, fraud when applying to anything, college, maybe a job, scholarships, anything along those lines. And I think that she did receive scholarships that were like minority-based scholarships, and so she maybe should pay that back, right? But at the same time, if she mimicked it, she looked like who she said she was she receiving the same societal pressures at that point that also were negative about that particular identity? Did she experience discrimination? Did she experience, ostracism, because of her race? I'm curious to know. I don't know if she mentioned any of that. I know she didn't in her Medium article that she wrote. She just mentioned about the act that took place and her being sorry and all those things. But she didn't necessarily go into those details about how, that lived experience was. And let's see. Lindsay says, other countries are also multiracial. It's just not as talked about culturally. Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I was thinking, one particular country that may have this experience is Brazil, considering how multiracial Brazil is. And maybe some more South American countries also had this phenomenon take place. It's not talked about as much because I don't think that it's as, culturally meaningful. Because while other countries are multiracial, it is not in the same capacity as, the United States. Just look at the neighbors to the north, Canada. The minority population is very slim, especially compared to the US. Sean is asking a question to Lindsay, so I don't know if I could particularly answer that. I'm curious. I'm wondering where this will go. Will we see more people that do this? Will we see, more, I don't lean one way or the other, to be perfectly honest, as far as this is concerned. What I do believe and where I am at is that we as society and should push our culture to definitely be more accepting of all races. That's literally what I can do, and that's all the power I have in this. Now, I don't have any power to determine how other people should feel about this. I know that there are some people that are absolutely insulted by it, that do see harm in this behavior. I do believe, to some extent, for sure, that if these people received things that were specific to real racial minorities, they should probably pay that back. They should be, responsible for doing this. But I actually don't really have a negative view of it. I don't see how it's particularly harmful. So someone may be able to enlighten me on that one. I don't see how, adopting these identities are going to hurt the identities in which they, like the people that are actually have for real that identity. I just can't see that. Fine Ashley asks, what should we realistically, asterisks around that, do to help the US move forward? Well, what do you mean by realistically? Because my realistically may be different from your realistically, right? So that's an interesting question that I don't think I'm equipped to answer, considering that realism or realistically, we may have different thresholds there. Because I don't, I think that realistically, we can do probably a lot, but somebody else may be like, no, realistically we can't because I don't want to work that hard. So, that's kind of up to you to determine that. Aaron A says the US definitely has a very unique multiracial history. I'm thinking that even if it was some kind of personality condition, it's not something the vast majority of people would accept due to that history, right? It's not, I don't think that anybody has to necessarily accept it just because of the ancestral history that is involved in identifying with a certain people group, right? Because again, they do have certain or different experiences, shall we say, in our societies based off of their background, their ancestry. So there's that, and so nobody has to accept it. We don't even have to consider it a disorder either, because what if it's not? What if it's, not, what if they are lying about it? I mean, that would be in and of itself a disorder based off of like truth telling, right? more in your antisocial behaviors section as far as disorders are concerned. But, you know, is this something that would be, can be, and will be classified as a disorder in the future? Who's to say? I think that it's more, I think that there's a lot more like negative feelings towards this than there is towards anything else, any other identity people adopt. Just because of the fact that, you know, there is that ancestry involved. Supreme scientist, can a person really fully identify with being another race though? For it to be meaningful, it seems to need to be permanent. Excuse me. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. I think that you know, I think that their identity would fall short if they don't have kind of that ancestry involved and that historical kind of pressure society has placed upon them based off of being a part of a person group, based off the color of their skin, or even, you know, that stupid one drop rule too. If you have, which was a law in the United States that would classify you as being Black or African based off of any type of person in your lineage having been Black themselves. So you could, your great grandfather could have been Black, and you would still be identified as Black based off of the one drop rule. That has subsequently been essentially removed in a lot of places, but there are still lingering effects of that do matter, especially within a historical context, especially even in your family. That matters. That particular law matters in the United States. So when you did not have that experience, when you don't have anybody around you that had that law applied to them, or these other laws applied to them, like Jim Crow, for instance, you know, can you stake claim to that identity just based off of your current feelings? I don't think it's necessarily the same as other things that we can kind of say, like transgender, for instance. You know, we can actually see a very real, meaningful impact of that. And it is actually more common too. Is it a degree issue, right? Because it's more common, it's more accepted, you know, versus the race thing. It's less common, so it's less accepted. Is it part of that too? I know that generally there's a visceral reaction to the race, to changing one's race. Than there is, especially today, than there is with changing someone's gender. Thank you, Lindsay. So I know that financially you mentioned that it's not a trick question as far as realistically due to move forward. But Lindsay mentioned that no one has a right to answer as of yet. No one has the right answers as of yet. That's why we discuss it, right? And so, yeah, I was mentioning the other day to a friend, I don't remember what was the context here, but kind of the contract you have with society and the contract that society has with you. And it's kind of like these unspoken agreements, right? And so, you know, how to move forward would essentially need to be that contract in play. And more people would have to agree to it than not. And, you know, I don't think anybody knows what that looks like. I know that it's not the current state of affairs. I don't believe that, removing all of some things that were vital to civil rights is the right act, considering that how much racism still does impact the United States, considering how discrimination still impacts the U.S. and decisions that are made. So I think that it's important that these laws are in effect and remain in effect, and that there is some organization, that there is some means of being, compensated or something like that if someone violates that towards you as an individual. I think that that's very important, but the current administration does not and has currently removed a lot of it. I don't think that, calling, finding someone, say a white person, and calling them racist if they're racist, I don't think that is appropriate, or it's a step in the right direction for anybody to say, reverse racism. I am in the camp where I don't believe a reversal of racism is actually possible, because it has to do with a power dynamic more than anything. So if a majority group holds power over a minority group, that is what it is determining whether somebody is racist or not. Now you can have discrimination, bigotry, and things like that, but racism is essential. Is that power dynamic has to be at play in order to be considered racist. And currently, we just don't have minority groups don't have power because they're in the minority. That's essentially what that means. So again, we should have things in place to protect minority groups because of that power dynamic. And at this time, that is not the current thought process of at least the federal government and many state governments as well. And I think that you're going to see we're seeing backlashes to that. We're going to see a lot of problems arise. You're going to see a lot of more maybe people coming out of the woodworks that are literal white supremacists and basically terrorizing communities and things like that. I think, and we have seen an uprising of that, and it's because they've been emboldened to do so, because they know that they hold power over another person group, and there's nothing essentially in a legal sense that minority group can do about it. So I think that, we're not in that right direction at this point. Yeah, I know. Fine, Ashley. Sorry if I came across wrongly. It's Ash, and I'm not attacking. Was really asking. I know. I know who you are. I recognized you. And yeah, I just can't realistically answer it. There you go. That word. I just can't answer it because I think we're going to have all sorts of different opinions as far as what realistic looks like. Steve Alvarez, please. Thank you so much. Just joined. Glad you're making this a regular thing despite health issues. Thank you. Yeah, it's easier for me to sit here and talk to you guys than, be out in the world and potentially getting sicker, right? So this is kind of a great way for me to talk to people too. And so I actually benefit from this as well. I guess I'm being selfish in that regard. Yeah, I don't know why, I'm kind of like, why me? Why is it that I still have to be coughing from this? I probably have to go to the doctor and see if there's any permanent damage to my lungs from this. And I think that would best explain why I'm having so much trouble. It's so strange though, because there will be, a week where I have no problems. I have no breathing issues. I don't have to use my nebulizer or anything like that. And then the next week, I'm like, I have to use it 3 times a day. I've used it once already today. I'm starting to cough more than I was afterwards. So I'm gonna have to do it again after the stream, just to feel better. William Bustos asks, you caught COVID? Sorry, just started following your channel. I got COVID in March, all the way back then, and I'm still feeling the effects of it today. So it's been 6 months, and it's miserable. I would not recommend it for anybody. And hi, just got here. Are you transracial? So Tiger Talk, we were talking about transracial as far as, if that should be kind of a category to describe people who identify as one race while being another race. Is that a real thing, a real phenomenon that we should track? I think we should actually look into this for sure, because we are seeing more instances of this occurring. Now, transracial traditionally has meant, excuse me, being of a minority racial group adopted into a majority racial group, and so that situation was considered transracial. And so there's a lot of debate right now, at least within the human-based fields, fields of study, as to whether transracial should actually mean a different thing at this point. I think if somebody's already used the word and they've used that particular word for decades, I think that maybe a different word should apply for this identity issue. We were asking also if this was actually something that was really meaningfully felt within that individual who did do this. So, does that person actually identify as the racial group in which they do not belong, right? And there are no answers to this, unfortunately. There's just not enough information on this phenomenon. There are instances of minorities doing this throughout history, actually. It's considered passing at that point. You pass as white. But there was still always a known fact that you did not, successfully inhabit that majority racial group. Now, there are instances now that are coming out, and I think I've listed, seven maybe, where, they successfully did convince the people around them that they were not white, but, African American or Puerto Rican or Native American. And so at that point, what do we call this? And, in some of these instances, they've lived that life longer than, that life in which they identify. They say that they are that race longer than they did as a white person, essentially. I know that there is apparently, from what I was reading, there's a Facebook group dedicated to people who do this. So it's seemingly becoming at least a more known or common experience in some way. And so we should probably look into this. There's also the question of, is this disorder? Is this a real disorder, or is this really based off of a lie that kind of just got out of control? I'm certain in some cases that certainly could be the situation, but how should we view this if once people know that they aren't actually a part of that people group that they say they identify with, they continue to live as if that is the case, right? So in the case of Rachel, good night. I have to keep looking at her name because it's Rachel Dolezal, who is a white person, and she continues to live as a black person despite everybody knowing this. This made headlines a few years ago. She was president of the NAACP chapter in her city or state, something along those lines. And so she did successfully, convince other people around her that she was indeed black. Sorry. Okay, so Tiger Talk says, so basically, it's like, whoa, Vicky. Personally, I think it's acceptability depends on what a person's motives are. For instance, whoa, Vicky seemed most interested in getting attention. Yeah, some of it to me seems very attention motivated, especially, I keep bringing up this person, the Rachel Dolezal case, but she essentially lied a lot. And so this could be based off a lie. I don't know why, like if this aspect is a lie, why she continues to live that way. Is it because she just feels comfortable in that lie? We can't say for sure. I mean, we really don't know the internal state of others and really the motives of others, right? We all we have to go on truly is what they tell us. And so should we believe what they tell us, that they actually identify more with a different racial group than the racial group that they were born into? That's a question for you guys, and that's a decision that society will make at some point, and I think it will be flexible because of the fact that these racial barriers anyways are breaking down. I think that, I don't think that, as more of the racial barriers break down, this may not even be a phenomenon because everybody shares in their society, in their everybody has the same cultural experiences and things like that. There eventually may be no differences in that regard. And so who knows for sure. Excuse me. William Bustos asks, I've heard that COVID is mainly off topic a little bit. I've heard that COVID is mainly a blood clotting disease. Have you heard anything similar? It's a virus that can impact so many different areas of the body depending on where it's able to travel. And a viewer sent me an article a few days ago about why the complications of COVID and how the immune system handles it. And so in some cases, it may definitely result in blood clots. There's been incidences of that where people have died from heart issues, from strokes, because of the COVID-induced blood clotting. But there's other instances where that is not the case. So they die from being unable to breathe because of damage to their lungs. So it's interesting because it's able to travel to so many different places, and it has so much variability among the population right now. Is one, because it's new, right? And two, because it is able to hide for longer in your immune system. So basically your immune system has essentially three things it does, three lines of defense, if you will. As the first one that attacks the virus that invaded. You have the second one that comes in and tries to repair things, tries to make things better. And the third thing that happens is the kind of, I don't remember what they called it in the article and what the official term is here, but it was where your immune system adapts, and so that's where immunity comes in, or partial immunity, hopeful immunity, to where it will be able to identify it more easily next time if it were to invade again. And so that those three mechanisms are in play, but the first one does not kick in when it should, before things start kind of getting out of control, because the virus essentially hides very well. And I just think that's an interesting thing. Excuse me. Tiger talk again. Thoughts on the Neuralink update? Somebody asked me this in the comments, and I think I responded. I believe I responded, but I don't think the thing is that it didn't impress me enough to really, bother with this. This has been done before. I have seen more revolutionary things that are from different researchers, not associated with Neuralink, but maybe they're in academic institutions where they have been able to have someone paralyzed from the neck down essentially walk again. using their brain. And so that is revolutionary to me. And it was a blip in the headlines. Like nobody, as far as like popular culture is concerned, cared about that. And that was cool. So that's way more than where Neuralink is at, with the whole pig thing. And I think it was over like a very, very specific area in the brain. And so it begs the question of, well, how many of these things do you plan on inserting into people's brains? Because you only had it over a very tiny fraction of the brain to do a very specific task, where our brains need to be capable of doing multiple things and many, many different tasks. So in short, it wasn't worth my time to basically attend to it very much. Oh, Ashley, an up question. What have you been up to recently? Not much, but I say that all the time. I moved during this whole COVID thing, and while I was experiencing the worst parts of COVID, and I just couldn't breathe, I moved twice during that time, and that was a nightmare. What else? Not much else though. Nothing notable, at least in my mind. Excuse me. My mom had a breakdown the other day, and I think the isolation was getting to her because she is already in a not very populated area of the country anyways, and so she just became more isolated because of the outbreak. Her husband died not like a year ago yesterday, and so it was understandable that she would have a really rough time. So I dealt with that a little bit. I don't feel comfortable visiting her just because of this COVID thing. I feel like if people would just wear their damn masks, that would help a lot, so that I don't potentially, if possible, get reinfected, because I definitely don't want it again. I don't know if my body would even be capable of fighting it again, because it was already really hard the first time. Oh, Ashley, you had it yourself? Yikes. Did it affect you at all? Or like what prompted you to get tested, just out of curiosity, or to find out if you had it, or even to know if you had it? Were you feeling any of the side effects of the virus? Because I certainly was. It was mainly lung issues. Even though my oxygen levels stayed pretty consistent and they were good, it's breathing out, oddly enough, that is giving me trouble. So I'm surely, breathing in isn't a problem, but I'll hear like this kind of wheezy thing happening as I breathe out, especially, at night when I lay down. And I'll have to use my nebulizer at that point. But, I try to explain this to people, and they don't understand that I can definitely isolate, the different aspects of breathing. I think you know this, Ash, but I had childhood asthma, and so I know what asthma feels like versus something else. With asthma, it was a breathing in problem. Like, it was very hard to catch your breath. It was very difficult to like exercise, because that could essentially cause even more problems as far as getting air into your lungs are concerned. But I didn't have that problem. It was breathing out that was bothersome, and actually continues to bother me now. Coughed up lung tissue. Oh my goodness. Yeah, you know what? And you're relatively young too. So, I mean, this is not an old person thing. This is, people vary, and people can have complications without having any like underlying conditions, without being old. This is something that affects all of us. And again, I just wish people would take this more seriously. Just even if like the majority of people have no problems, you know, we kind of live in a society, and I think people have lived and forgot this. We live in a society, and what is the point of society? And I keep saying this, it's to basically gather all the resources that everybody's capable of doing in order to distribute them evenly and assure success, like that you'll live and that you'll be able to produce progeny and that they'll live and so on and so forth. What type of society do you have when that isn't the case? When people are so selfish, that they think that it's bothersome, or not even bothersome. They think that it's cumbersome, right? To wear a dang mask, it is not that big of a deal. It's a piece of cloth. And, as of this time, it has been, this piece of cloth has been shown to decrease people's chances of contracting COVID. And even, if they have it themselves, giving COVID to others. And so it just seems like a responsible thing to do for society. But I think people forgot that. It makes me angry that people have forgotten this, because at this point I'm like, well, what's the point of society then? If we have a substantial portion of the population that literally aren't getting any benefits from society, you might as well just throw it out and start over, in my opinion. Yeah. So you have underlying immune issues. Yeah. And the thing is that a lot of people do too. But that's no reason for people to be like, well, you have immunity issues, so if you die, oh man, so what? And that's how people are seeing this right now. And it's uncomfortable how many it is that are viewing it that way. Because in my mind, that is how people behaved during Nazi Germany, right? That's some Nazi shit right there. And they're, basically going, well, if you die off, that's fine. It will decrease, the gene pool and shit like that. But that's not how genetics works, and that's not how genes work. And, we don't even know some of these, if there's a genetic basis for a lot of conditions. And so that is a stupid way of viewing this. And it's very, very uninformed, to say the least. So you still wear a mask even though you can't transmit? Yeah, I do too. If and when I go out, I'm actually pretty isolated. I haven't gone to the gym in months, and I miss it. So I'm angry again, because it's not that this could have all been resolved had people been responsible with this. Had we had a government that was also responsible with this, we may not be in the condition that we are. I don't think that it's okay that we have 100,000 people in the U.S. that have died from this, over 100,000. That is unacceptable. If 100,000 Americans died all at once, in one moment, right? We would be having a fit right now. We would be doing everything in our power to prevent that, or to figure out why that happened, all of those things. And so just because it happened over a series of months, mind you, that's not years, months, doesn't make it any better. These are still people that will never, ever, ever come back. That loved ones will never, ever, ever get to talk with again, get to see the smile, get to, play with again. They're gone. And so I think we should really be mindful and cognizant of that fact, because people do not come back from death, being dead, generally speaking, right? They just don't. Excuse me. Rohan Dang asks, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. identify as disabled. I've never heard that one before, and that's because I think you're responding to supreme scientists. Personally, I find it offensive that white people believe they can identify as non-white. The legal ramifications of allowing people to identify as disabled is going to be crazy. Imagine a non-disabled. Yeah, I have not heard about that either. Are there people that truly identify as being disabled? Now I know there's that body dysmorphic disorder where people want their limbs gone because they just don't want it there. They think that it's that it doesn't belong, and so some people have gone through drastic means to have that happen, and it does permanently disable them as an effect of that. But they psychologically feel whole being in that state. So is that something that you're talking about, like that disorder that then therefore makes people disabled? Because I haven't heard of anybody identifying as disabled. The UCA, Universities and Colleges Union, has a long history of enabling members to self-identify, whether that is being Black, disabled, LGBT, or LGBT plus, or women. But I mean, who is to determine how people identify? If somebody says that they are something, like, hey, I'm disabled, there's probably a good reason they're saying it more than not. I think that, we're talking about exceptions to the rule. The rule is, people are who they say, people are who they identify with, or people are who they identify as. There are exceptions, and the exceptions tend to be quite rare in nature. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't allow people, because of those exceptions, we shouldn't allow people to identify and tell us that and assume that to be true. That should be the first thing that we do. And I don't care about the exceptions because I know that they aren't representative of everybody, right? It's kind of like when people say, well, not all white people or not all men. We know this. We know that that's the case. And so we're not going to basically say all men, are rapists or something, because of course that's a lie. Not all men are rapists, but they do rape more frequently than women do. And so we also know that. And so do we then, assume that, all men are rapists and then just, determine that based off of the fact that they just do it more frequently than the other sex does? I don't think so. And, I think that, as far as being disabled is concerned, there are a lot of people who do have what's called hidden disabilities. And so it could be, a severe fatigue, for instance, where they just cannot function throughout the day because of their fatigue. That's a disabling effect, right? And so do we, as an outsider looking in, is it up to us to determine that that's the problem for that individual? Or can we just defer to what the individual tells us? I would imagine that we would defer to that over, applying it and trying to diagnose and trying to assess ourselves. I think that is a really, for one, it takes too much power away from the individual, right? Who does identify as a certain way and is a certain way and is who they identify as, right? We strip that from them. And so we say, you're not allowed to identify this until we assess if that is true. Well, that's bullshit, right? That's not how we should behave. It doesn't even make sense to do. So, if there's exceptions to the rule, so what? They'll experience consequences for that, it's not like people get, people in these kind of, what should we call it, like minority categories, people in these minority categories, they don't get special things, really. They get what? If you're disabled, you get a parking space. That's what, maybe you are on disability and you get $200 a month. That's not a huge benefit. In fact, that could put you in a dire situation still, because we do not take care of people who have disabilities, the elderly members of our society. That's just unfortunate, but that is not a privileged position to be in. Excuse me. Okay, so William Bustos says there is a MIT professor named Dr. Hugh Hare, who had a freak accident when he was a kid and lost his legs. This accident inspired him to go into engineering to design prosthetics to make him whole again. He claims that with his prosthetics, he is not disabled. Without them, he is. He rock climbs and runs with his prosthetics. And so we need to figure out how to enable people with disabilities. I think that should be the goal, right? In some cases, we're just not there yet, but in others, we certainly can enable them if they feel incomplete in their current state. There are people with disabilities that do not feel that way, that they say, this is who I am, I have this disability, and this is me whole. And it doesn't matter if I have this disability or not, I am a whole person. I think there's a lot of pressure on society to be very mobile, to basically not appear to be disabled. There's a lot of pressure in society to do that. So do we say that is acceptable? Or do we say, well, maybe we should just accept people as they are, and if they feel incomplete, we should figure out how to make them feel whole. But if the vast majority of people with disabilities do not share that feeling, then that's okay too. I think that there's room for both things here at play. But that's really cool that he developed this prosthetic. Yeah, Ash, you actually did start going into this field of human factors, which I think is a fascinating field, and I think I like it, and I like to look more into that as well. Excuse me. All right, guys, I am getting tired. I'm actually going to have to. I'm starting to cough more and having more trouble breathing, and so I need to go do my asthma thing. So I appreciate you guys listening to me babble about a lot of things. Again, I don't have any answers for you as far as how to treat this situation that's at play with whether it's quote unquote transracial, racial dysphoria, if you will, ethnic dysphoria. I don't know even what to call it, but I think it's a phenomenon we should absolutely look into. And I have seen people push back from doing that entirely, from actually looking into that phenomenon. And I don't understand. So if you guys have ideas onto why people would push back on even looking into this, let me know. You'll have to let me know in the comments because I need to go so I can breathe better. All right. Thank you guys so much. I hope you have a great week. We'll do this again next week, hopefully. Ronan Diane says, thanks for streaming. I missed most of it, but I'll go back and watch. And William Bustos, thank you so much for your contributions to my channel. Get well soon. Thanks for the chat. Thank you so much. Take care, feel better, peace. Yep. I will talk to you guys later. And bye. No, end.